Welcome everyone to the Atlanta Transformative Leaders Series October meeting. Very pleased to be able to host two visionary leaders in this space in Atlanta. I am Robert Hobbins. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Georgia State University Sustainable Futures Lab, and we are the host of the series. And the Transformative Leaders Series highlights efforts of Atlanta-based individuals and organizations advancing research, policy, and solutions to help bolster Atlanta's resilience to climate events and build a better future for all Atlantans. We focus on work that folks are working on currently, also ideas and research agendas for the future that participants and other members of the public can learn about and potentially get engaged with. So we definitely encourage calls to actions, events that are happening in the community, and basically ways that we can collaborate and work together and find ways to build a community practice and connect communities of practice that are already ongoing throughout the community together to catalyze transformative actions. And today's theme is on advancing particularly climate solutions and action within the business community, also communities of faith. And very excited to be able to listen to Blair and Cody today. First, we're going to go over Zoom keeping. Give me one sec. Just so everyone's familiar with where everything is located, I encourage you to keep your Zoom muted throughout the presentations until we get into the Q&As and discussions, and you can do that in the bottom left-hand corner. While you're doing that, I do also encourage utilizing the chat to let us know of resources or things that come to your mind, anything you hear that reminds you of other work already happening that you want to provide links and resources or have questions. Please do use the chat feature. When we get to the QA, we would like to identify who has questions and be able to call people out in an organized manner for that. So please, select the raise hand in the reactions once we get to that point, so that you can be called on to speak. The meeting is being recorded. In case you didn't get the notification, I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that. We do post these to our Sustainable Futures YouTube channel. I'll provide the link at the end of the meeting. But we encourage you, if you hadn't had a chance to check out the previous recordings from our other organizations that have spoken. Whoops. And first, I would like to invite Blair Beasley to present. So Blair is the Director of Climate Strategies at Ray C. Anderson Foundation. She has a history with Drawdown Georgia, and through her position at Ray C. Anderson Foundation, helps spearhead the Drawdown Georgia efforts here in Georgia. I got the pleasure to meet Blair Beasley and Cody actually at the Georgia Climate Conference this past summer, and was inspired by listening to the talk from both Cody and Drawdown Georgia about the great work that they're doing in this space, and very excited to be able to host them today. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot more about Blair's work and Drawdown in just a moment. So I'd like to invite Blair to share her screen and take the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Let's see if I can get my slide deck up.
Perfect.
Okay, is that showing correctly? Awesome. Well, it is just really exciting to be with you all today to share about Drawdown Georgia, which, as Robert mentioned, is an initiative the Ray C. Anderson Foundation is helping to lead, and it's focused on identifying and scaling climate solutions in Georgia in ways that advance other societal priorities, including equity, public health, economic development, and the larger environment. It's been just about 1 year since a team of researchers publicly released the research that underpins this effort. And since then, we've grown from this really exciting research project into a dynamic and multifaceted initiative. So here's what I'm hoping to share with you all this afternoon before I turn the mic over to Cody Norrid, who I am very happy to be sharing the virtual stage with today. So first, I'm going to provide just a little backstory on how Drawdown Georgia came to be. And as I hope you'll see, it's a project focused on climate solutions in Georgia that's really rooted in research. So I'm going to walk through the highlights of the research and talk about what we found. And then I'm going to focus on how we at the foundation, as well as partners across Georgia, are using this research to inspire and inform the growth of climate solutions across the state. So first, the inspiration. The story of how Drawdown Georgia began is really rooted in the work of Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown was first a New York Times bestselling book and is now a really wonderful nonprofit organization. So the book has this catchy subtitle of the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it highlighted about 100 climate solutions that could be deployed globally to reach a state that they coined as drawdown, which is when levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere stop climbing and actually start to decline. And it's this really inspiring list of solutions that includes some of those traditional engineering solutions like solar power and electric vehicles, as well as some social solutions like educating more women and girls. So many people, including myself, were really inspired by this solutions first framing to climate mitigation. But there's one thing that a reader cannot do with this book. It takes this truly global perspective, and so it does not provide a roadmap for how any particular locality, what they should do in their city or state or region to reduce their own emissions. So in this way, we saw it as a real inspiration, but not a real handbook for local change. So enter Drawdown Georgia, which I'll be talking about today. And this project was intended to provide that translation from a set of global solutions to a climate solutions roadmap for Georgia. I had the privilege of serving on the Drawdown Georgia research team through some work I did with Emory University. And now I'm part of the team at the Ray C. Anderson Foundation that's supporting this next phase of work, which is focused on growing climate solutions here in Georgia. So I'll quickly note, for those that aren't familiar with the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, we're a family foundation here in Georgia that was set up to honor the legacy of Ray C. Anderson. Ray founded a successful global carpet tile company called Interfaith, and he championed this notion of business doing well by doing good, and really turned his focus to environmental stewardship and sustainability. The foundation now works in a myriad of ways to carry on those values. And as part of our effort to carry on the legacy of Ray C. Anderson's pursuit to brighten the corner where you are, we've been the primary funder of Drawdown Georgia to date. But the project of Drawdown Georgia is really much bigger than any one foundation. So in 2018, a group of researchers from Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, Emory University, and of course, Georgia State, embarked on a research journey to answer the question, which of those 100 solutions identified by Project Drawdown are most applicable to Georgia? And this is just a snapshot that was taken before COVID of some of the research team, and it's researchers as well as many key community leaders that contributed their time and expertise to the work. Okay, so how did we evaluate which solutions were most applicable to Georgia? Well, we took that list of the 100 climate solutions from Project Drawdown's global analysis as the jumping off point. And then we ran each of the solutions through a series of filters. Is the solution relevant to the state? Will it be ready at scale by 2030? Is there sufficient local experience? Can the solution cut enough greenhouse gas emissions to be meaningful this decade? Is it cost competitive with other solutions in the sector? The team also considered what we call beyond carbon impacts. So looking at how solutions could impact things beyond carbon emissions, such as the public health, equity, the larger environment, and jobs, particularly as these solutions scale in the state. Doing so, the team winnowed down the 100 Project Drawdown solutions to these 20 Drawdown Georgia solutions. So as you can see, they span 5 key sectors: electricity, buildings and materials, food and agriculture, land sinks, and transportation. And they contain some of the usual suspects like building more solar, replacing gasoline-powered vehicles with electric vehicles, and investing in energy efficiency by retrofitting existing buildings. But it also contains some solutions that may surprise you, such as reducing food waste and increasing composting. Finally, as you scan through the list, you can see that most solutions are focused on ways to decrease sources of greenhouse gas emissions. But the 3 land sink solutions, those in that kind of purple color, are all about increasing our natural sequestration of carbon dioxide through trees and vegetation and soils. So things that naturally pull carbon dioxide out of the air. The research team modeled the impact of scaling these solutions to what we consider to be ambitious but achievable levels over the next decade. And we found that Georgia could reduce its carbon emissions by about 1/3 in 2030 and put our state on track to contributing to the US's emission goals under the Paris Agreement. And this would be huge, and we know from the research it would just be a start. So finally, it's important to note that these solutions are really focused on what Georgia could do right now to most efficiently and effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions this decade. So it's all about between today and 2030. If we had focused on what Georgia could do by 2040 or 2050, I suspect some additional solutions may have found their way onto the list. So for example, we do not focus on the role of new buildings at all, only existing buildings. And this is just because there's not enough new buildings that will be built in Georgia this decade to make the carbon reduction impact that we were looking for. But we know that the buildings we build today will be with us for many, many years. So building low emissions buildings, whether it's LEED certified or even carbon sequestering like a living building, these things really matter. And I flag this just to say that just because we do not highlight it here doesn't mean that we don't support efforts to pursue other carbon-friendly solutions going forward. So far, I've really just talked about carbon, but a fundamental part of both this analysis and this initiative is what we call beyond carbon. And as the name implies, this is a focus on how climate solutions can impact societal priorities beyond carbon emissions. So this includes things like impacts on equity and the environment, public health, and the economy. So the research team worked with community partners such as Partnership for Southern Equity, Southface, and Greenlink Analytics to map these beyond carbon impacts to each of those 20 solutions. So for example, what are the air and water quality impacts of scaling a solution? Is the solution affordable and accessible? Would scaling the solution create local jobs? And what are the demographics seeing job impacts in those sectors today? What are the anticipated impacts on property values and in what neighborhoods? Are there public health impacts, such as impacts on premature mortality or morbidity? Does the solution impact quality of life? And does deployment require new educational outreach to stakeholders? You can see how each of those 20 solutions map to these indicators on our website. And I'm going to quickly unpack one solution that allows us to kind of put it all together and dig in. So I picked our large scale solar solution, which we define as either utility scale or community scale solar PV systems. So as of mid-2019, Georgia had more than 1,500 megawatts of solar PV capacity, almost all of which is utility scale installations. And we know more is coming. There's been exciting announcements even as recently as this week. The 2019 IRP for Georgia Power, which is that planning document that gets approved by the Public Service Commission, it included 2,000 megawatts of new utility scale solar by 2022. And that is meaningful. So for each Drawdown Georgia solution, we estimate what it would look like to take 1 million metric tons, which we also call 1 megaton of carbon dioxide equivalent off of the state's approximately 125 million metric ton carbon footprint. And as you can see at the very bottom of this slide, in the 2030 megaton estimate, we could reduce that 1 megaton of carbon dioxide by adding 10 new 100 megawatt utility scale solar installations, as well as 36 new 5 megawatt community solar installations. And for those doing the quick math in their head, that's about 1,180 megawatts. But we know we could actually do much more. In our modeling of how solutions could scale to those ambitious but achievable levels I talked about earlier, we estimate that large-scale solar could help cut emissions by about 11 million metric tons of carbon reduction by 2030 if we scale up faster. But here's where the beyond carbon thinking comes in, because we want to scale solutions like solar thoughtfully. We highlight in the beyond carbon analysis that replacing fossil fuels with solar can improve air quality, which has both environmental and public health benefits. And constructing new solar facilities can create new jobs. The 2019 solar job census shows that there are already 270 solar companies operating in the state, but there's a real opportunity to diversify that solar workforce. So that same report found that the solar workforce in Georgia is largely white and largely male. Women comprise only 26% of the state's solar workforce, and 73% of that workforce is white. And finally, we flagged some issues to watch around end-of-life disposability of solar panels, land use choices for siting facilities, and water usage related to the cleaning of panels. And once again, we have slides like this for all 20 of the Drawdown Georgia solutions on our website. So that's a snapshot of the research. It was released almost exactly a year ago in October of 2020. And we have been focusing since then on how to bring this research to life to support the scaling of climate solutions in our state. I'm going to talk about a few ways that we at the Anderson Foundation, as well as many others in the community, are going about this kind of exciting and new phase of work. And I just want to pause here, and because I think it's important to note that Drawdown Georgia is not actually its own 501c3, so it's not its own NGO or organization. Instead, it was really built to be this open platform for individuals and organizations to use as we address the climate challenge collectively. We often say at the foundation that our goal is not to be the leader of Drawdown Georgia, but to support a leaderful movement. And I know many of you on this call and on this webinar are leading efforts or involved in efforts to scale climate solutions in the state. So I hope seeing how some others are utilizing this framework sparks ideas about how it could be helpful to you in your efforts as well. So how are we doing this? Moving from research to activation. Well, one way is through efforts that support community building, and I'll briefly mention two examples. First, we've created a Drawdown Georgia Leadership Council. That's whose spaces are there on the left side of the slide. And the goal of this council is to really guide Drawdown Georgia as it grows into this next phase of work. We put this leadership council together to really represent leaders and voices from across the state that bridge some of the traditional dividing lines that have slowed progress historically, whether that's urban and rural, Black and white, Democrat and Republican. And they're helping guide the program and serve as ambassadors for the work. We're also running a blog on our website that includes many voices from throughout Georgia, members of the Leadership Council, leaders in the nonprofit space, higher ed, business, and beyond. And this blog is intended to showcase exciting work that's going on in the climate solution space in our state. Next, we're working to educate and communicate with the public, with stakeholders, and with decision makers in Georgia. So once again, two quick examples. We have launched a new webinar series that we're calling Climate Solutions That Go Beyond Carbon. Our next webinar in the series is focused on reducing food waste and will be on November 9th from 2 to 3:15. We also put out a newsletter twice a month that features a news roundup of what's happening in the climate solution space in our state, as well as gives updates of what's happening in Drawdown Georgia world. And because this is a university audience, I'll also note that we are still putting out some of our more wonky communications. The Drawdown Georgia research team continues to produce peer-reviewed journal articles, including an article on the foundational research that was recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And you can find all this and more once again on our website. But this is a big lift, so collaboration is really central to our theory of change. As I mentioned earlier, Drawdown Georgia is focused on building this leaderful movement. And so I'm going to quickly highlight 2 examples of what that looks like so far. These are examples of what we're kind of calling affiliate groups. So efforts to take that Drawdown Georgia roadmap and apply it to a particular community. So first, Drawdown Georgia Higher Ed. The Georgia Climate Project, which is a group of 9 colleges and universities in the state that are working collaboratively on issues around climate change, they launched a new initiative this summer called Drawdown Georgia Higher Ed. And their program has kind of 3 key pillars. One, they're highlighting examples of higher education leadership in climate action. They're doing this in several ways, including by producing blog posts for the Drawdown Georgia website about leading examples from our state's higher education institutions. Second, they're curating open access curricular resources to assist in the training of the next generation of climate leaders. And finally, their hope is that they can start compiling existing greenhouse gas inventories, institutional goals for emission reductions, and best practices for climate action planning from our state's higher education institutions. And next, I will not steal any of Cody's thunder, but I'm just going to note that his great work with the Drawdown Georgia for congregations, bringing this roadmap of climate solutions to the faith communities in our state, he's really a key partner in our work. 2 more slides, and then I will wrap up. I want to note some exciting new collaboration with businesses in Georgia. The team at the Racy Anderson Center for Sustainable Business at Georgia Tech's Scheller College of Business is launching today, actually right after this webinar at 2, a new Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. It's an effort that's bringing together a group of about 16 founding companies with more to be added. And these are companies that are either headquartered in Georgia or have a significant footprint here in the state, and that are committed to leveraging the collective impact of Georgia's business community to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050 through a just, competitive, and sustainable transition. So companies that are joining this compact, they have to commit to supporting Georgia's transition to net zero carbon emissions, agree to participate in at least one collaborative initiative that advances this goal, and to report annually on activities. And the founding members include businesses kind of big and small. I've jotted down the list of our founding members. It's Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Atlanta Gaslight, Autodesk, Better Earth, Cox Enterprises, Delta Airlines, Evershed Sutherland, Gooder, Google, Interfaith, Norfolk Southern, Southwire, Coca-Cola, TKE, UPS, and YKK. So it's really exciting to see these businesses come together and begin to work collaboratively on a Georgia-focused effort around climate solutions. And then finally, on my last slide, I just want to note that the research effort also continues, and we're working with partners at Georgia Tech on a few exciting new projects. I'm going to highlight 2. This includes an effort to create a public-facing interactive map that tracks greenhouse gas emissions in Georgia at the state and county level. The data will be updated monthly, and it will break down emissions by key sectors. So you can see electricity sector or industrial sector emissions across the state. This is a really exciting new tool that should be released to the public later this year or early next year. And it's work that's being led by Dr. William Drummond at Georgia Tech. So there's this old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. And this tool is helping us to understand where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from in our communities and hopefully provide a way to track our collective progress in reducing these emissions. There's also ongoing research on the solutions themselves, including a focus on the policy environment in Georgia This work is being led by Dr. Marilyn Brown at Georgia Tech, who was the PI on the initial research as well. She's working with a team of graduate students to publish her findings in academic journals to document and explore how climate solutions are being deployed in our state and how various policies could accelerate those deployment pathways. There's a webinar on November 18th to share more about some of her more recent work. So it's been an exciting year since the launch of the foundational research, and there's lots more planned for 2022, both from the Anderson Foundation and importantly from partners throughout the state. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I think open it up for questions, if that's right, Robert.
Yep, we are now in the Q&A mode for Blair. I do have one while people might be thinking. And first of all, thanks for telling us about the business compact. I just heard from Amy actually a few days ago about it. Super exciting that that's being launched. The other question I had was about discount rates for the future. You know, I've been in different spaces hearing about that. I just listened to Hidden Brain talking about how gratitude, just the process of being grateful, like makes you discount the future less. And you know, think about solutions that might be a little bit more costly now than you know, immediate actions that that you know, take into consideration your money going further now, spent now rather than the future. And then I was chatting with Cody about, you know, Ministry of the Future, also discussing how the discount rate is kind of an arbitrary number of how much we discount the future and how we can potentially give the future more weight. So when I was thinking about, you know, all the solutions that Drawdown Georgia is providing, was discount rate a part of, you know, figuring out what is viable for 2030 in particular? Did you have a particular discount rate that you guys landed on, and how?
Yeah, I don't think I have a perfect answer for that, but I will say that this idea of how do we value what we can do now versus 2040 versus 2050 was really a foundational part of developing this framework. So were we going to look to kind of build out what Georgia's whole path should be to getting to zero? We decided instead to really focus on solutions that were market and technology ready today. We feel like in this state, there's so much low-hanging fruit. There's so many things that are ready to go and are economic today that we could be doing. And so this thought experiment and this research was really focused on what would it look like if we did the things that we were able to do right now, to not even up to its technical potential, but just to like an ambitious level, to this achievable but ambitious. We kept coming back to that. How far would that take us? And we didn't actually have an end goal. Like, we weren't trying to build a plan that got us to X. We really backed into how far these technology and market ready solutions could get us. And it turns out they can get us really, really far, not even by doing all them to their, you know, nth degree, by just leaning in a little bit more, going a little faster than we are currently. We can make really important and impactful emissions reductions.
There's time for one or two more questions. We can come back to questions if something comes to your mind at the end, and we can move to Cody. I'm gonna share my screen just for a second. So Cody is the executive director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Now, we, as part of the Sustainable Futures Lab and a lot of different work that we do, you know, we work all across the U.S. And the Interfaith Power and Light organization has been very influential in mobilizing communities of faith for climate action. Did quite a lot of work in Florida and have been you know, very familiar with Florida's Interfaith Power and Light. And I was really enlightened, as I mentioned earlier, by listening to Cody's talk at the Georgia Climate Conference and learning about their green teams at each congregation. I thought that was a pretty powerful theory of change, and I believe probably he'll be talking about that in a sec. Cody comes to us with a master's in theology, in divinity from the Candler School of Theology from Emory University. And as I said, he's leading GIPL. And so, yeah, I'd like to invite Cody to share his screen and take the floor.
Thanks so much, Robert. Let me get myself together here. All right. Great. So like Robert said, my name is Cody Norwood. I serve as the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And this afternoon, not morning, I'll be going through a little bit of Drawdown Georgia for congregations, how we've adapted some of the work that Blair was talking about and actually gotten that into congregations and faith communities. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the policy barriers and opportunities for ensuring that these solutions can thrive in Georgia and actually live up to their potential between now and 2030. And then I'm going to show a short video on our coastal resilience and disaster preparedness work and hope that it demonstrates kind of what the links are between some of the climate solutions here and actually some of the environment, equity, economic, and public health impacts that Blair talked about, sort of those other filters that are brought to this work. So first, a little bit about who GIPL is. Georgia Interfaith Power and Light is a 501c3 that has been around for almost 18 years, working across the state of Georgia to inspire and equip congregations to address climate change, environmental injustices, energy burden, resource depletion, and other environmental disruptions. And we do that through three primary pillars. So a way to think about how we organize our work is, educate, act, and advocate. And those three pillars are listed right here. So the first is what Robert was talking about, our green team coaching model. We're explicitly a grassroots organization. And so the way that we organize is by getting 3 or more individuals within a faith community who actually wants to lead the sustainability or climate or environmental justice initiatives in that faith community. We have now, this is a little outdated, we have over 80 of those teams right now across the state of Georgia. We've got about 20 to 25 educational modules, film screenings, panel discussions that are on offer for that. And then we have a free green team coaching program. So actually we assign a staffer to each green team who helps meet with them once a month, come up with a strategic plan on how they're going to implement these solutions. Now, after we do that, we educate first and then we act. That's where Drawdown Georgia comes into play. We have a practical carbon solutions or climate solutions program. That includes a professional energy efficiency program, water efficiency program, rooftop solar, EV infrastructure, waste assessment and reduction. We're not calling that a zero waste program. So those are how can we implement those solutions on site to actually make a difference on the land and the facilities owned by faith communities. And then the third step is policy and advocacy. We know that for some of these solutions to succeed, and especially for some of the systemic injustices to be rectified, that we need policy change. We need the systems to be changed. And so you can see here, there's a large number of policy issues that we work on, including things like coal ash, offshore drilling, biomass, transit, 100% clean energy plans, and then of course, clean energy policy at the Public Service Commission, which Blair mentioned in her presentation. Robert also mentioned our theory of change, so I'll mention it here. Our theories of reach, this is kind of why we go with a green team model. The belief is that we work with a green team, a small group of individuals who then influence the congregation to make different choices, implement more proper climate solutions. Then that congregation affects the community in which they sit. When we start thinking about local and community solutions, and then it actually extends further than that to local, state, and federal level policy to continue making systemic change. You saw this from Blair, these 20 high impact solutions from Drawdown Georgia. And when Drawdown Georgia came out, we decided, you know what, if these are the 20 most high impact solutions for making a difference between now and 2030, we should align all of our program areas with these 20 solutions, with the goal of, we wanted to provide practical pathways for congregations, faith communities, faith leaders, people of faith, to take all of these 20 solutions and have on-ramps so that they could engage each of these solutions. Now, the first step for us was determining which of these solutions could be implemented on site. You see a list here. A large majority of the solutions can be implemented on site, either on the land or the facility. And then there are a small select of policy solutions, things that really can't be achieved unless we deal with policy at the local, state, or federal level. We're also an organization that's extremely rooted in environmental justice. This is why the looking beyond carbon piece that Blair mentioned, that environment, equity, economics, public health matters so much to this work. And I'll just read through these. As people of faith, we affirm that justice for creation cannot be achieved without fully addressing the environmental justices impacting our neighbors and our communities. We must begin to dismantle the systems which perpetuate environmental injustice, environmental degradation, and climate change. And the idea that we can't love creation, God, or our neighbors without dismantling those systems and without getting engaged in transforming local and state policies. So for us, we like to say, you can't work on climate. There's no point in working on climate unless you're going to work on environmental justice. And then if you were to solve environmental justice, you could solve some of the challenges for climate change. I mentioned our green team approach, and this is kind of how that starts. These are all the green team entry points. You evaluate a congregation. We help draft sustainability policies. You want to involve everybody at every level. So faith leaders, deacons, decision makers, develop a strategy, and then engage in this kind of 12-month process, which I talked about. I'm going to run through some of this quickly so we have some time for discussion at the end. So what I've done here is just break out, based on the 20 high impact solutions that Drawdown Georgia lifts up, what are all the programs and ways that congregations can currently implement those solutions. So for us, some of the easiest ones are things like energy efficiency retrofits, rooftop solar, electric vehicles. And so for those, we have a professional solar program where we do free solar assessments for faith communities. We provide financing options, a solar loan fund, and we actually maintain relationships with a majority of the solar installers in Georgia so that we can actually play a liaison role. We find that solar installers don't really understand faith communities, and faith communities don't really understand solar installers. And so we play that liaison role to get those two together to make those solar installations happen. To date, there's about over 35 or 40 solar assessments now, and just in 2020 alone, we were able to more than double the amount of faith-based installations in the state. Solarize is a community solar program, which is a key solution for Drawdown Georgia. This is there are two programs actually going on right now, which I'll push: Solarize Atlanta and Solarize Savannah. This is a limited time program, usually anchored in a particular geography where residents, businesses, and nonprofits can gain access to a bulk purchasing model. So it's the cheapest way that you can gain access to solar to implement on your home. So to date, you can see the numbers there. Most importantly, almost 5,000 kilowatts of rooftop solar installed and over 116,000 tons of CO2 avoided over the 25-year lifespan of those systems. PowerWise, which is our energy efficiency program, we know that energy efficiency is not necessarily the most attractive or flashy solution, but it is one of the most implementable, affordable, and impactful solutions that we have. So we provide free energy efficiency recommendations to congregations, and then we provide another step on top of that, which is a professional energy audit program, which has a small fee associated with it. And then we give out matching grants to congregations to implement those energy efficiency projects. Simple energy efficiency projects can decrease the amount of energy that a building is using between 20 and 25%, and decrease the amount people are paying on their bills by that much as well. And so today we've done over 400 of those audits, and we've funded over 425 energy efficiency projects at congregations. We also this year launched a new EV charging station program to get EV charging stations at congregations. And then there are individual and community practices. Blair talked about these. I won't read through all of these, but all of these food-related and mobility-related solutions are things that we can actually help build up the infrastructure for at congregations, doing education, and then those individual practices move throughout the community, and communities make commitments to that, and then it moves them into policy as well. These are some ideas that we pose to congregations and communities, things like meatless meals, carpooling opportunities, tree plantings, recycling programs, developing sustainability policies, and then getting involved in actually the policy piece of it. So thinking about city council or county commission bans on styrofoam or hard to recycle materials. And then we get into local and state policy issues. Like I said, some of these solutions can be implemented on site right now, and that's great. And some of them require us to change policy. So we actually provide advocacy training for congregations. We'll help you set up an advocacy meeting. We'll give you issue education on each of these issues. You know, we want to expand energy efficiency. We want to expand solar. We want to eliminate things like biomass and other fuel sources that are create more carbon and environmental destruction than they're worth. And then we also work at the federal level. So you've probably been hearing a lot about the Build Back Better Act and versions of that, trillions of dollars of investments into these kinds of infrastructure pieces that we need. So think about retrofits, solar, especially large scale solar, which Blair talked about, mass transit, expanding things like MARTA, making electric vehicle infrastructure possible. We know that EVs are growing in Georgia, but actually one of the largest problems that we have is we don't have the infrastructure to allow EVs to thrive as much as they could, a lack in charging stations. So those are things that we look at. I also wanted to highlight a couple of the burden pieces that we talk about. How does this work intersect with some of the justice initiatives happening in our state? And so Blair highlighted the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan and Rate Case that went before the Public Service Commission. That's when they make decisions about what kinds of resources will generate power for Georgians and who will pay for them and how will they pay for them. And so we hear a lot that as we're coming up on the 2022 IRP and rate case, all this will be happening again next year. So it's a great time to get engaged with your Public Service Commission and explain that these Drawdown Georgia priorities are something that you want to see. You want to see more energy efficiency. You want to see more solar. But I want to highlight energy burden for us. So often in Georgia, we'll hear that we have some of the lowest rates in the country, and we are on par for low rates. But unfortunately, people don't pay rates, they pay bills. And in Georgia, we have a lot of other costs on your bill that are not related to rates. There are all these other riders baked in. One that is getting a lot of attention is the nuclear cost recovery rider. That's on your bill if you're a Georgia Power customer that is actually paying for the construction of units 3 and 4 at Plant Vogtle, units that are currently not producing power. So those costs are being paid by ratepayers for a unit that's not producing power. And so what does that mean? Well, I want to talk about energy burden for a second, and I understand that Matt Cox from GreenLink has been on this program, and so you might be familiar with some of this language, but energy burden is the amount of after-tax income that is paid for things like electricity, gas, and transportation. The national average for that, I think, sits around 3%. That's the national average for energy burden, which includes all of those three categories. The map that I have up right now is actually from Atlanta's 100% clean energy plan and the study that they did as a part of implementing that plan to understand energy burden in the city. And what you can see here is that this is actually just electricity, so not gas and transportation. That there are areas in Southwest Atlanta, primarily Black communities, BIPOC communities in Atlanta, that are paying upwards of 7%. And in the city of Atlanta proper, you can see almost 10% of their after-tax household income on electricity alone. Meanwhile, if you look towards the northern suburbs of Atlanta, primarily white communities, you can see that the energy burden is much lower. And so we have to ask, well, why is that the case? And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons that I mentioned is all of these extra fees that get placed on bills that actually don't necessarily reflect how much energy use is being consumed by a household. But the other is we actually don't have the necessary infrastructure in place through policy to ensure that energy efficiency investments are being made where they're needed most. So low-income communities, vulnerable communities, generally BIPOC communities, especially in cities like Atlanta, like the map that I just showed, the utility doesn't have a robust enough program to ensure that energy efficiency retrofits are being made in those homes. And so that's one of the policy solutions that we can push on. How do we get the solutions to the people who need them most? And who's going to help pay for that? I also wanted to highlight coal ash really quickly. This is tangential to Drawdown Georgia, but I think it highlights an issue. Blair talked about a lot of what we are talking about in the Drawdown Georgia solutions are how do we limit the amount of fossil fuel infrastructure that we're using by transitioning to clean energy, and then creating some active sources by increasing things like land sinks. I want to highlight that we have to do that while we are also paying attention to how we dispose of our legacy waste. We can't leave our legacy waste and just move forward into clean energy. We have to address it. So coal, as you know, is a horrible resource. And in Georgia, we've been burning coal for a long time. And for a long time, coal ash, the bottom ash in particular, was scooped out of those power plants and was stored in liquid unlined pits across the state of Georgia. And so all of those pits, we know, most of them are leaching into the groundwater. And in some areas, there's been a concern that you can see from this graphic that I'm showing, that as it leaches into the groundwater, that it can actually be pulled up through other water resources or through domestic wells. So it's actually an environmental justice issue. So while we're pushing forward with these clean energy commitments, we also have to be mindful of how do we clean up the waste that we've left behind because of the things that we have been using for energy for quite some time. I wanted to include this just so you can see the proliferation of the problem. All of the blue dots on this map represent coal ash ponds. Again, those are unlined pits in which coal ash has been verified to be leaching into the groundwater. And all of the red dots are municipal solid waste landfills that are permitted to store coal ash. So just to give you a sense of that being across the state, I will move quickly because I want to show you this video. I wanted to highlight one more thing before I get there, which is a land sink problem. So as Blair mentioned, one of the things that we have to combat and sequester carbon the most are land sinks. And for Georgia, one of our most pristine resources for doing that is the Okefenokee Swamp. So South Georgia, beautiful blackwater swamp, one of its kind in this hemisphere, is actually under threat from a mining operation. There's a proposed mine right on the ridge of the Okefenokee Swamp refuge in a place called Trail Ridge, right outside the bounds of the swamp, that would necessarily disrupt the hydrology and could completely ruin large swaths of the swamp. And so I wanted to highlight this to just say we can't just move about in constructing new land sinks, but we need to be mindful of the threats that are coming up against the land sinks that we already have and be very diligent in playing a bit of offense on ensuring that that does not happen. And then I wanted to draw attention to how, when we are implementing these solutions to combat climate change, to sequester carbon, how are we also going to help prepare communities who will already be dealing with the brunt of the impacts of climate change from the carbon that already exists out in the world, right? So even if we eliminated all of the carbon and global warming processes that are happening now, we know that there are still impacts that are coming down the pike, especially for coastal communities. And so coastal resilience and disaster preparedness is a big piece of our work. And so I will offer this video on a little bit of that testimony as my last piece. So thanks so much.
Truth is a lonely place, but it is the only place. If we don't deal with truth, what you're going to end up having is the fiction that has brought us to the place to where democracy right now is in jeopardy.
The communities here on the coast are Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are on the front line of the impact of climate change, particularly here in Brunswick, where there's a tremendous amount of flooding that results from tropical storms, sea level rise, and they are experiencing these impacts at alarming rates.
September of last year, and we had an unusual rainy day. And yes, we're on the coast, so high tide plus rain means flooding. And we probably had about maybe 3 feet of water that was just standing here in this area. And in light of what we experienced last year and what it cost us here, we decided that we want to do our part in trying to protect what we have here. And so we started boarding up the holes in which the water can infiltrate underneath the structure and put sandbags up. And so that if we can't have the structures in place that will protect us, we have to protect ourselves. But everybody can't afford sandbags. Everybody can't afford to always move away or protect themselves when flooding happens. Some people have lived in this particular city all their lives. Can't afford to go anywhere else. And they can barely afford to stay where they are. And those are the people who really need the funding to come in to improve the area and the conditions in which they live.
This is where these winding roads have led.
I don't think that people even recognize that climate change is a spiritual destruction, and we have transferred faith into fear. If you ain't got no courage, you ain't got no faith. And if you ain't got no faith, you ain't got no God. And that's what's done happened to us.
I will rise up. I will not fall.
Churches have dug real deep into their coffers and are meeting the needs of communities that are being impacted by climate change. I think that the federal government should be also investing in robust, rich, bold economic recovery as well as infrastructure.
This will be the day.
People don't want to do the new restorative jobs because it costs training. But I think we have to sort of take a step back and pause for a minute to say, but what is it costing us in the future?
But if we are to walk in the path that Jesus has set before us, perhaps we should let the idea of scarcity, we shouldn't let it stop us so easily.
As I referenced in my sermon today, that God can do amazing things with just a little bit, but we have to do our part as well.
Thinking that we don't have the time or the money or the energy might be self-limiting when we actually have access to much more than we can ever imagine.
I will stay strong, never giving up faith. I will go all the way. This will be the day.
So I just show that to say there is a lot more at stake than just the world. There are communities and people and ways of life that are at stake in this very state, and that it is pivotal that we get to work on implementing these solutions. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Cody. If Maria would like to ask her question, go ahead and unmute yourself, Maria, if you're there.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, we're in a different space today. Yeah, my question from the chat was about how you connect and start new green teams, or how you reach out to new faith communities to extend this work into new areas.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of a mix of a lot of different things. Some congregations and communities find their way to us through our work in the community, or just hearing about the work that we do, or coming through one of our programs. But we also try to identify portions of the state that we think would be good to organize in, that stand to benefit from some of these solutions. And so, for example, we have a coastal staff person and are organizing on the coast because we see that as a leading edge for some of these solutions, and a part of the state that is most at risk. But so it's kind of through both dispersing people and going all around the state. It's through people finding their way to us. It's through any and all ways, trying to connect. There's some 18,000 houses of worship across the state of Georgia. And so if we really want to make the impact that we want to make, we need to connect with all of those houses of worship and all of those faith communities.
Thank you.
Robert Lloyd.
Hey, I'll see if I can read my question here from the chat. Oh, okay, yeah, my question is for Cody. Cody, some of the solutions you mentioned, like packaging bans or meatless meals, seem like hard sells to some sectors of Southern culture and society. And I'm curious how you navigate resistance to some proposals. Personal resistance, you know, just on the part of people expressing skepticism or a desire not to make certain kinds of changes, or community resistance, you know, someone saying, for instance, you know, meat is an important part of our culture. We don't want to give it up. And we, you know, we are resistant to a suggestion like that. Anything to say about that? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. That's a good question. You know, I mean, I think first thing is you can't expect that every community is going to implement every solution. You know, that's first step. You know, we hope that communities find solutions that are accessible and interesting to them to implement, and then look towards, you know, what's the next solution. But I think one problem that we have in the environmental movement that has been caused for us by corporations who depend on us buying things is that the cost, the true costs of what we buy and consume aren't baked into the price that we actually pay. And so part of our work is educating congregations on, you know, the cost of something like styrofoam isn't 10 cents a cup. It is the petroleum poison that spills through pipelines over indigenous lands and then is baked into a cup by not paying workers enough, and then comes to your congregation to be filled with 1 cup of coffee to be put into a river that then will show up in a river cleanup that you get your youth to do 3 years from now. You know, that is the life cycle of something like that. Is not something that we talk about enough and that we capture enough. So that's one way, is trying to elevate, you know, what are the actual costs of the things that we're talking about. You know, and I would apply that to something like meat. You know, I mean, we have great relationships with people like at White Oak Pastures and other places who would say there are great ways to consume meat, but chances are the cheapest meat that you might be buying to consume isn't that. So if what you want to do is still consume meat, there's a better way to do it, and it's going to cost you what it actually costs to produce something that isn't harming you and your family and harming the planet at the same time.
Thanks, Robert. Anyone have any last question for either speaker? If not, I believe their contact information is online. You can definitely reach out to them afterward if you'd like to get in touch and, you know, connect your congregation, or, you know, be part of the solutions, joining Drawdown Georgia's Leader Full network. I also did want to put in a plug for upcoming talk. We will be having, actually Amy is with us, Amy Gutierrez from the Nature Conservancy will be speaking next on Thursday, November 18th. And we also have the YouTube channel. I believe Charlene shared that in the previous, at the beginning of the meeting, in case you would like to check out our previous installments. And also, if you know anyone that you think that, hey, you know, there's this really neat organization, new nonprofit, new business that's emerging, you know, some really great ideas that, you know, you think this platform would serve to give them a voice to help connect with this community, you know, do let them know, and we'd love to have them featured in the future, coming up next spring. So yeah, do get in touch with me if you do have anyone in mind.
And Robert, can I plug one more thing before we get out of here?
Sure.
I wanted to just say, yeah, for those of you who are tuning in, we're actually hiring 2 positions at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light right now. We're hiring someone on the coast to do this work with coastal communities. And we're also hiring a policy associate here in Atlanta to continue working on some of these policy issues. So if you yourself are interested, or you know some people that are interested, we just posted both those jobs today on our website, gipl.org. You'll see it there.
Excellent. Any last minute question or comment before we adjourn? I just want to say thank you again to both Cody and Blair, for joining us today. Really inspirational work you guys are doing, and yeah, look forward to continuing collaborating together.